Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Police Director Mike Rawlings tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining me. I am joined tonight by Michael Rawlings, newly appointed police director for Memphis Police Department. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Along with Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. You were named interim in February. You got the job in about a month ago. We'll talk about all kinds of things, even maybe towards the end of the show, a little bit of time looking back on being up on the bridge in the summer and all of that. But right now, for the first part of the year, the real headline has been the murder rate. Violent crime as a whole, I think the most recent numbers that actually it's leveled off. It's up a little bit, 1% or so from last year. Clearly the murder rate is up, 40, 50%. Why is that? What is your take of why that murder rate spiked so much, and what can you and your officers do about it?
Well, to answer the first part of the question, I think that we're all trying to figure that out across the nation. I'm a member of the Major City Chiefs Association. Last I checked, 44 cities, major cities, have spikes in homicides this year. Last year, there were probably 30 cities that had a spike and we didn't. Right. So working with major city chiefs, other agencies across the nation, and also the FBI, we're kind of diving into what is pushing our violent crime. Locally, the legislature has not helped us with guns and cars. I kind of share that everywhere I go because access to guns, gangs, drugs, more violent subculture within that group, I think has led to our increase in homicide rates. Recently, we found out that probably 42% of our homicide victims are gang members or have gang affiliation. Yeah. So we're taking a deep dive into that, working with the University of Memphis to look at 5 years of homicide so we can, instead of just coming up with anecdotal data, that we can really look at it, have some specifics, partner with the academics to look and see what we can do to change it.
Yeah, and I think I've heard you say that most murders are between people who know each other. Is that correct?
Without a doubt.
And so, is there a strange way in which people listening should feel somewhat safer in the sense that if you don't know someone who's selling drugs, doing drugs, kind of engaged, isn't a gang member, that although the media puts these murder headlines out there, what is the message to people who aren't engaged in gangs, drugs, and so on?
Well, the message to everyone is to be safe because, somewhere between 18 to 20% are domestic violence related. So these are people that are family members, they're engaged in sensitive and relationships. Some of them are married. We just saw a recent one, girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife. Yeah. So I think that, yes, I agree with what you said, but I think that as a community, we have to make a decision on what type of life we want to live. And I think that there's so much attraction to violence. It's on TV, it's on reality TV, it's in sports, unfortunately it's in the legislature. We see congressmen and senators, talking about violence. And we see some of it spilling over to our national election. So we as a country, as a community, are going to need to decide what do we want to do, what's acceptable. The level of violence for me is unacceptable.
Yeah.
We should all be outraged.
Yeah. Bill.
You talked about the percentage of homicides that involve gang members or some kind of gang affiliation. Mm-hmm. Is that higher than it's been in the past? Or
I'm not so sure we really have dove into that in the past. That's something we started looking at very hard this year. So unless that's what the 5-year study is about, to go back and look and really do a deep dive in homicides.
Right, and the reason I bring it up is because Chicago has had a tremendous problem, and one of the things that people there have talked about is that the discipline, if you will, among the gangs, or the kind of tension that gang leaders have been able to diffuse or block off has somewhat disintegrated, and people think that's an element of what's happening in Chicago.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I was in Chicago probably a month ago, meeting with Chicago police and a number of other police chiefs from around the nation. And those are some of the things we talked about. What we're seeing now is there's no, the traditional gang structure we're not seeing. There are a lot of hybrid gangs of you know, a mixture of gang members. So the traditional challenges, the traditional responses that we've had, we're going to have to look at them and come up with something different to respond to this new type of environment that we're in.
What were some of those traditional responses that you think are going to have to change? But traditionally, you would do what?
Well, if you got a gang with structure, okay, then you can, you know, really look hard at the leadership at that particular. But if you got a whole mixture of gangs, it's kind of challenging.
Maybe they say they're more affiliated, but they're not necessarily hierarchical in the way gangs used to be.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So there a lot of discussion over the last couple of years about the number of police. There were a lot of people who left. I think the police force maxed out around 2,500.
Yeah.
Mayor Strickland ran on that. They wants to get back to that number. He's talked about it since he's been in office. To you, what is there a magic number? Is there? I know Strickland has said 2,400, and that's your goal. But to you, I mean, what is that number? And
2,500, without a doubt. I've been a police chief of uniform patrol, both districts. I started in 2009. I was training commander in 2008. The number is 2,500. Some people debate it, but again, they hadn't been in the trenches like these men and women have.
what does that do for you? If you had wave a magic wand and you had what would that be? 400 or 500 more police officers tomorrow. What would you do with them?
Well, first of all, we'll have adequate staffing to run our day-to-day operations. I mean, that's critical. And you know, with the addition of police officers, you know, we have 5 priorities. One of them is community outreach. We could do more community outreach, have a higher police presence, focus more on gangs, and target kind of our top 4 crimes to make our community safer. You know, every day I talk about us not having staff, but every day we get more requests for police officers. So, you know, to respond to what the community wants, then we need to have staffing to do that.
Bill.
So I think there was just a promotion ceremony this week as we speak.
Yesterday.
So the promotions are on the way. The last I heard, the academy class started at around 100 and was down to 24, which is a problem that I think all police directors have faced, because you can start out with 100, but you're usually not going to get 100 in an academy class who go onto the streets.
Yeah, Bill, I'm not sure where you got those numbers from. Our goal was 100, and we started somewhere in the 40s. So, you know, our attrition rate, you know, runs between 10 to 15%.
Okay.
You don't want everybody to start and graduate. There's probably something wrong with your program. But again, we're looking at everything. We're looking at our, you know, what we're doing in recruiting and retention. We're looking at what we're teaching, what our curriculum is, what we can do to attract good men and women to the Memphis Police Department.
How do you think police recruits people who say, I want to be a police officer? How are they different from when you made that decision?
You know what? I'm not sure if they're fundamentally different. You know that, you know, I'm 50 now, so I joined when I was in the 20s. So definitely my eyes and what I know is a lot different than when I started. However, you know what? In talking to the recruits and talking to the PSTs, you know, these individuals are still committed to making a positive difference in their community. They're standing up to the challenge. And, you know, our last class, I spent a lot of time with them, able to talk to them and thank them for their commitment, thank them for their sacrifice, thank them for their desire to do something different that others, you know, may aspire to do but may not be qualified to do it. So I think they're fundamentally the same. I think the nation is different. You know, we have mass media, social media, a 24-hour news cycle. There's more scrutiny on law enforcement than I remember any time in my career. So we have a lot of challenges, but we still have men and women that are ready to step up to the challenge.
Does the faster pace of how things move, does it change the notion of patrolling, and is community policing as a result of that as a goal? Is the nature of community policing different because there is that kind of connection, and word on the street travels much faster than it
Well,
used to.
first we have to define what community policing is, because it means different things in different parts of the country. So, and it can even mean different things in the city depending on who's asking. So everything is different. Police officers are wearing body cams. We have 400 in-car video systems. We'll have fully deployed our body cams before the year is out. There's cell phone video. There's video everywhere. And like I said, the level of scrutiny is different. So yes, it changes the behavior of police officers. It definitely changes the behavior of the public. But, we want officers to get out in the community. We want them to meet people, sit and talk. It's a challenge when you answer 1 million calls a year. 2 million calls come into our 911 call center. So we're one of the busiest places in our region, if not the busiest. And we have to try to figure out what that balance is. And that's why that staffing question you asked earlier is so important, because staffing allows you to respond to the high volume of calls. It allows you to respond to the crime. It allows you to respond to the needs of the community.
Politicians will say that legislators, city councilmen, come to me when you don't have a problem and let me get to know you before you have a problem. Is that part of what you're talking about? That if you have more police on the streets, they can be out, they can see people when there's not a problem. They can get to know people so that when that call comes in, there's more of a connection?
Yes,
yeah,
without a doubt.
And scrutiny, you talked about scrutiny. I mean, a lot of that comes, what people, the Ferguson, what happened in Ferguson, and this whole national conversation, this national spotlight on police shootings and the role of police. Your take on that, and I've heard people describe, quote, the Ferguson effect 2 ways. That one, for police, it makes them hesitant. It makes them hesitant to respond. They don't know what kind of scrutiny they're under. They don't know what kind of doubt and skepticism they might face. And then it also potentially has an effect on people who, in communities that see a lot of crime, they don't have a trust in the police. That's another way of defining the Ferguson effect. Do you see either or both of those things as a result of all this scrutiny of what's the proper role of police and when police can and should shoot someone and draw their weapon and so on?
You asked me a couple of questions.
I did. Give me that whole debate.
Let's start at the top.
Okay, good.
Director Comey came out strongly talking about the Ferguson effect. There's a number of individuals kind of diving into that, trying to see, is that a real effect? So let's just look at it from a common sense standpoint. If anybody is scrutinized, every single move they make, everything they say, everything they do is scrutinized to the level that we see law enforcement, it's going to impact the decisions they make and the performance of their duties. Law enforcement is more responsive to change, more responsive to criticism than almost any entity in the United States. We are accountable to the people we serve. So when we think about what happened after Ferguson, well, let's look at it just from a strictly economic standpoint, where we've seen many, many more protests, which means that we're devoting resources to protest. Those resources are not in the community. They're not doing the normal patrol duties because they are responding to protests. You think about the almost $8 million spent just in Ferguson alone during those protests. You think this year we've spent at least $8 million on the various protests that we've had in our protective posture after we've seen 8 police officers killed, biggest attack on law enforcement since 9/11. That affects your ability to police. You talk about body cameras and all the cell phone video. And what I would ask people to do is, when there's an incident, allow an investigation to go through.
Yeah.
We call for DOJ, we call for all these things, we call, TBI investigates our shootings. So allow the investigation to go through. Let's review the facts. Where changes need to be made, we will be responsive. We will address those and make changes.
For you and for your officers, body cameras, you mentioned those are rolling out, delayed, but they're rolling out sometime this year. Does that give a police officer comfort, or is it because there's a backup to what they say happened? This is what happened. This is what my camera shows. Or does it make them feel monitored and hesitant and What's the reaction among most police officers to having a body camera on?
Well, I answer your last thing first. I mean, we're sitting on live TV, so everything we do is monitored. So,
Right.
you know, if we sneezed or dropped an ink pen, the whole world would see it. So yes, it makes them feel monitored. But when I talk to officers on the street, talked to an officer the other day, and you know, I saw he had his body camera on him, asked him how it was going. He said, "I love it." And I was kind of puzzled. I wasn't expecting that from him. Said a couple more things. He said, "Love it." Then I said something. He said, "Love it." I said, "Wow, why do you love it?" He said, it keeps us accountable, and it keeps them accountable too.
Yeah.
I had a guy waving a cell phone in front of my face saying, "I'm recording you, I'm recording you." And he said, "Well, sir, I have a public service announcement for you. I'm recording you too."
Yeah,
He
yeah.
said the guy suddenly calmed down. They were able to talk about whatever he was there for. So again, we're definitely embracing body camera technology. The officers that I talk to love them.
Yeah. Bill.
Let's talk about the police department's response to the protests that we've seen. I'll start with the candlelight vigil at Graceland.
Mm-hmm.
There was some discussion about who was responsible for what there. Your police department, in determining who was a protester, who was there for the vigil, what did the officers rely on in terms of that judgment?
Well, you know, first, that there's some pending litigation, or could be.
Okay.
So I really don't want to talk about that. What I want to talk about is that you know, we have had a plan where we would work with Graceland to keep that event safe. We had a number of threats of protests, and it wasn't we're going to protest. It was we're going to disrupt that candlelight vigil. And so I'm proud of the response the men and women of Memphis Police Department, Graceland Enterprises had to keep that event safe. Just yesterday, I received a card from someone, I think from England, that was here visiting and thanked us for our presence, our ability to keep that event safe. So again, I'm proud of what we did. I'm proud of that. We walked away from that day. No one hurt, very few arrests, and Graceland was intact just as it was before we started.
So do you think there was a threat beyond what actually happened there that evening?
Great question, Bill. Think about what's happened over the world. Nice, France, truck runs down, fireworks, you know, kind of a 4th of July celebration like we see here, runs over, I can't remember how many people were ran over and killed. So we're on Elvis Presley Boulevard, a major thoroughfare. So we were worried about that. We've seen international and domestic terrorist attacks. We've all forgotten that 49 Americans were killed in Orlando. Biggest attack on Americans since 9/11. Well, I don't forget about those things. You know, we just celebrated or commemorated the 15th anniversary of 9/11. The country's been at 15 years of war. So the threat of international terrorism is real. The threat of domestic terrorism is real. The threat of violence is ever present. And it's our job to respond to that, to mitigate that, keep our visitors and our citizens safe. And that's exactly what we did.
Okay. Is there a point at which you look at the preparations for these events knowing that there's going to be some kind of protest? Is there a point at which you look at the preparations and say, I think we may be is there such a thing as being too visible in terms of the police presence when you have that kind of a situation?
Well, there's a balance. You know, first of all, we don't know every single thing that people are planning. Let's take Southern Heritage Classic. We had a very heavy police presence in and around the stadium, in and around the tailgates, in and around Beale Street, because we want our visitors and our citizens to come enjoy venues and be safe. So public safety is something we work on every single day. We're going to remain vigilant. We're going to do what we think is good. And there's always a balance, and you have to decide what that balance is. But when you have, threats that are articulated, you know that there's the ever presence of kind of unrest or violence, because you may decide that you're going to protest, not parking on the grass, to bring up another recent one. Mm-hmm. Someone else may come up and have a weapon or have a more nefarious plan that you're not party to. But when you get people gather and there's a threat, It's our job to stand there and protect people, protect their right to protest, protect their right to assemble. We just want everything to be done lawfully and in order.
What has the dialogue been like since July 10th when we had the bridge protest, kind of a really important moment in the whole discussion of this? Has the discussion been able to continue between you and the protest leaders, or what's that dialogue been like?
There have been a number of conversations. So, the mayor's taken a lot of point. I want to applaud the mayor for his openness, his responsiveness. We have responded to every single thing that the protesters have put on the table. We will continue the dialogue. I've met with anyone who wants to meet, and we will continue to do those things because, like I told on the bridge, okay, bridge is shut down. What's your next goal? What do you want to accomplish in the next 30 minutes, the next hour? And director, we want this, we want that. I said, do you think we're going to accomplish that standing on this bridge? And my thing was simple. We can't talk on this bridge. It's not safe. There are children up here. They're women, they're men. The bridge is made for cars and trucks. It's not made for pedestrian traffic. We have to get off this bridge. That's exactly what we did. We can talk till we are blue in the face, but once you protest, you got to come to the table and talk and work out and say, okay, what do we want? What are the goals? How do we get there? Because that is a process.
We got just 5 minutes left. We could talk about the bridge a whole lot more, but I'm gonna shift on because right now the marijuana ordinance the city council has proposed to decriminalize certain amounts of marijuana. You've been opposed to at best wary of this ordinance. Is that a fair way to say it? And tell me why. Tell me your concerns about the ordinance.
I have a number of concerns. First of all, as the police director, I am not going to promote marijuana smoking. We have an epidemic of drugs sweeping the nation, we can line up folks on both sides of the table and talk about, is marijuana a gateway drug? Well, I'll tell you what I see on the street. So on the street, marijuana becomes a secondary, where the officer makes a stop, sees guns, person has warrants, and they have marijuana in their pocket, or officer makes a stop, individual rolls down the window, marijuana smoke comes barreling out. So that's just from what we see in the interaction with marijuana. The second point is, someone said it the other day, if you're sitting at home smoking marijuana all day or get up in the morning smoking marijuana, it's going to be very hard for you to be productive. I want to encourage young people to seek employment, gain employment, and maintain the employment. Marijuana probably is not going to help you outside of that subculture where drug use is okay. We're in a heroin epidemic. We have over 70 deaths from heroin. So when I talk to people that are doing rehab, drug rehab specifically, they talk about how marijuana gets people to a tougher drug. Start smoking marijuana, may graduate to pills, from pills maybe to heroin.
I don't think anyone would debate the heroin and pill and crack epidemic that the country is seeing cocaine. But certain states have legalized marijuana at this point, and that seems to be the trend in the country. Is that that more and more states are legalizing it, saying that that's just not an issue. It's like alcohol. People can abuse alcohol. They can abuse marijuana. Alcohol can lead to alcoholism. But you see a more direct connection when it comes to marijuana.
Very poor comparison. First,
okay.
The jury is still out.
Okay.
At one time, we believed the world was flat and people would not go out and venture so they wouldn't fall off the side of the earth. So we need to really slow down and let the jury, come out and see, because in Colorado, they've had increases in DUI where marijuana was the drug of choice. They've seen increases in violence related to marijuana. But let me get back to the ordinance, since we're here in Memphis.
Yeah.
Originally the ordinance did not allow the officer discretion. The officer's ability to have discretion is critical.
Right.
That was changed. I still have, a little apprehension about the amounts. I think
discretion to do what? And I apologize for interrupting.
Discretion to go with a state charge or issue a city ordinance summons. Because the thing about it is the officer on the street has to look at the totality of the circumstances. So, is the marijuana package for individual sale? Is there a gun?
Okay.
Are there other charges where one court should hear the whole thing versus breaking it out in other courts.
Do you have concerns? Just a couple minutes left. We could talk about a whole show about the issues I'm going to bring up right now. Part of the motive of Martavis Jones on City Council has said that this is partly to take some of these small level offenses that disproportionately affect African American, particularly young African American men, and start them down the road of criminal justice. Take away for the path to heroin, but just small amounts of marijuana. They liken it to taillights, $300 fines, suspended licenses, all those small offenses that begin to pile up fines, begin to pile up a night in jail, 2 nights in jail. And does, from your point of view as a police officer, does there need to be reform of those small offenses that, again, so many people are saying, look, this is hitting the African American community particularly hard?
Well, I'm African American, if you
Yes,
noticed.
yes.
I am concerned about everything that impacts the African American community. I'm definitely committed to reducing the amount of African Americans that enter into the criminal justice system. So the only thing I ask for is let Nashville figure out how this is going to run. Give them time to work it out. Let's make
in terms
sure
of the state legislature.
in terms of their ordinance
their
that's
ordinance. Excuse
moving
me.
through
Thank you.
Metro.
Thank you. Yes.
Metro and Memphis are two different entities because Metro has a consolidated government. Memphis, you're talking about General Sessions Court and you're talking about City Court. But the other issue is just to make sure we have robust conversation, we bring everybody to the table so we make an educated decision.
All right, we are out of time. We could have talked about that for 20 more minutes. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week.